Good morning, Secretary Mayorkas.
Good morning.
Is there a crisis at our southern border?
Senator, there is a very significant...
That's a yes or no question.
There's a very significant...
Is there a crisis?
Senator, there's a very significant challenge...
I think your microphone is not on.
There is a very significant challenge that we are facing.
Yes or no,
at the southern
is there a
border.
crisis?
I believe I've addressed that question.
So you're
Senator.
refusing to answer?
Senator, there is a very significant challenge, and
Will
we
you
are
answer if there's a crisis?
Therefore, we are dedicating the resources...
Okay, so you're refusing to answer. Well, Secretary Mayorkas, I'll tell you someone who is willing to answer, which is your and President Biden's chief of the Border Patrol in a sworn deposition in July of 2022 when asked, would you agree, Chief Ortiz, that the southern border is currently in crisis? Answer, yes. Notice none of those wiggle words, none of that equivocation. One word, one syllable, yes. Are you willing to speak with the same clarity as Chief Ortiz? Is there a crisis at our southern border, yes or no?
Senator, I'm very proud to work alongside...
So you refuse to answer. Let me ask you the next question. Has the crisis at our southern border made Americans less safe, yes or no?
Senator, we are dedicated to the safety
Has the crisis made Americans less safe? I don't want a discourse. It's a yes or no question.
Senator, we have a challenge of...
You refuse to answer the question. Mr. Secretary, let me show you how someone doing his job answers a question in a straightforward manner. Chief Ortiz, is the crisis that is currently ongoing at the southern border making the border less safe for Americans and aliens alike? Answer, yes. One word, one syllable, 3 letters. That's how someone answers a question and does their job. You're being a politician misleading the American people. Let me give you a chance again. Will you show the same integrity Chief Ortiz shows? Is the crisis at the southern border making Americans less safe? Yes or no?
Senator, we have 260,000...
You refuse to answer the question. Let's move on.
And security of the
Next question, Mr. Mayorkas. Has the crisis made aliens less safe? Yes or no?
Senator, we are seeking...
So you won't answer that question either. It's a yes or no. Has it made aliens less safe?
Senator, smugglers are exploiting...
Has the crisis made aliens, less safe? Are you willing to answer it?
Senator, the smuggling organizations...
Okay, you're filibustering again. Let me ask you this question. How many migrants have died under President Biden?
Senator, your phrasing of the question is actually quite misleading.
How many migrants died in 2022?
Approaching our southern border?
Yes.
Precisely why we are seeking to exclude the smuggling
do you know the answer? Do you know how many died?
I do not.
You do not. Of course you don't. I know how many died. 853.
That is
853. And by the way, here are the numbers that have died every year. You go back to 1998, you see it's consistently between 300 and 400, 300, 400, 300, 400. Suddenly, 2021, what happens? You get in office, and that red line are dead bodies. I've been on the Rio Grande, and I've seen dead bodies floating there who've drowned because of your refusal to do your job. You don't even know how many have died. What do you say to the Texas farmers and ranchers who find pregnant ladies dead on their property, who find toddlers dead on their property? What do you say to them?
I say that is why precisely we are taking it to the smuggling organizations.
But you are not. That is simply not true.
Number 2, it is why we are dedicated.
Let me read from the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal 2 weeks ago ran an article entitled, "It's like a graveyard. Record numbers of migrants are dying at the border." The story begins with this chilling line, quote, Eagle Pass, Texas. Local officials keep a refrigerated truck to hold the bodies of migrants who drown in the currents of the Rio Grande while trying to cross the border into the U.S. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that this article be entered into the record. Let me ask you a different question. How many children have been sexually assaulted by human traffickers under the Biden administration?
Senator, this is precisely why we instituted...
I don't want a lecture. It's a question. How many children have been sexually assaulted by human traffickers under your administration?
Senator, this is exactly why on January 5th we announced the parole
Do you know how many? Do you know how many children have been sexually assaulted?
This is why we...
Okay, you're going to refuse to answer that question as well. Let's move on. It's obvious you've been instructed to stonewall, so I'm not going to let you. You don't get to stonewall and filibuster. Now, one of my Democratic colleagues before said the Democrat talking point, quote, "This problem didn't start under Biden." Look, I get if you're a partisan spinner, you got to figure out something to say about the absolute catastrophe that has played out under the Biden administration. True or false, Secretary Mayorkas, 2020 was the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. Is that true or false?
It is certainly the lowest level of immigration in many, many years. And what was it
Okay, fine.
in 2020? What was it, Senator, in 2020 that impacted the entire world, including the United States?
Okay, so your testimony is the reason we had the lowest rate was COVID. It had nothing to do with building the wall, nothing to do with any catch and release, nothing to do with Remain in Mexico. With all respect, Mr. Secretary, that answer is laughable. And in fact, if you look at illegal immigration, let's look at CBP encounters. You can see 500,000, 500,000, it drops to the lowest level, and boom, what happens? You show up. And that red line is you. That red line is Joe Biden. And you're claiming nothing happened. Oh gosh, this was here before us. No, you made the decision to allow this to happen. Let me ask you, we now have over 5.5 million people who've entered this country illegally under Joe Biden. How many murderers have you released into America?
Senator, I'm not aware of any murderer whom we've.
So you don't know?
Senator, let me say something.
Do you know?
If you take a look at.
No, you don't get to give a speech. Do you know how many murderers you've released?
I'm just trying to answer your question.
How many rapists
Senator.
have you released?
Senator, I'm trying to answer your question.
You can answer, I know or I don't know.
Senator, any individual who poses a public safety threat.
How many child molesters have you released?
And removed into the United States, from the United States.
Oh, so your testimony under oath, subject to perjury, is that you have not released any murderers, rapists, or child molesters among the 5.5 million? Is that your testimony?
Mr. Chairman, may I have the opportunity
No, you may not. You may answer my question.
You're not
Is that your testimony, yes or no?
Senator, you're not allowing me to answer your question.
I am allowing you to answer. I'm not allowing you to filibuster.
If you take a look at the pace of immigration in 2018 to 2019.
You're refusing to answer. Let's move on. Let's move on to gotaways. Gotaways are the people that get away that you know about. Now, what happened under your administration? Gotaways consistently down at this low line. Boom, you get in. And they go from below 180,000 to 600,000. Now, I'll tell you this about a gotaway. You don't know, among those 600,000 a year, you have no idea how many are murderers, correct?
That is precisely why the number of gotaways.
Do you know how many of those are murderers?
That is precisely why.
So you refuse to answer the question. You know how many are rapists? Do you know how many are rapists? This is a question. You're a lawyer. You know how to answer questions. Of the 600,000, do you know how many of them were rapists?
Senator, this is why
the answer is no. Let me ask you this. Do you know how many of them are terrorists? And I don't want to, Senator, here's my lecture on this. Do you know how many of the 600,000 gotaways were terrorists? Yes or no?
Senator, we are focused on the
You refuse to answer that as well. What's the result of massive gotaways? Well, one of the results is drug overdoses. And we now have, last year, over 100,000 overdoses who died, the majority from Chinese fentanyl streaming across the border. Now, you told Senator Cornyn you care, but look what has happened under your policy. When you open up the border to the worst illegal immigration in our nation's history, people die. You claim you care. Mr. Secretary, that is a lie. You know, some months ago, Karine Jean-Pierre stood up at a White House briefing and said, people are not just walking across the border. Was she telling the truth?
Senator, you are
Was she telling the truth?
so profoundly disrespecting.
Was she telling the truth?
22 years
Okay,
of government service.
you get to answer questions. You don't get to give speeches.
Senator, I served as a federal prosecutor.
All right, you're refusing
years.
to answer. If you look at, she was lying, and she was not lying on her own. She was lying on behalf of the President of the United States. Now, the photograph of people walking. She was lying on behalf of the President of the United States. This is a photograph from just one day along the Rio Grande of hundreds of thousands of people walking across the border. You have allowed this to happen. The photograph that was before, what are these wristbands?
I don't know what they are.
You don't know what they are. Mr. Secretary, you have just testified to the American people you're incompetent at your job, because I've been to the southern border, and if you go to the southern border, along the southern border, you see thousands of these wristbands because the illegal immigrants wear them. The drug cartels, every color corresponds to how many thousands of dollars they owe the cartels. You have turned these cartels into multi-billion-dollar criminal organizations, and these are modern-day leg irons because these are children being sold into sex slavery, and you don't even know what they are. That is astonishing. Mr. Secretary, how many children have been sold into sex slavery under your administration?
Senator, we are taking it to the cartels.
How many children have been sold into sex slavery? Do you know how many children have been sold into sex slavery?
To an unprecedented degree.
Mr. Secretary, I want to say to you right now,
it is precisely,
your behavior is disgraceful, and the deaths, the children assaulted, the children raped, they are at your feet, and if you had integrity, you would resign. And I will tell you, the men and women of the Border Patrol, they've never had a political leader undermine them. They despise you, Mr. Secretary, because you're willing to let children be raped to follow political orders. This is a crisis, it's a disgrace, and you won't even admit this human tragedy is a crisis.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. Let me start with what I hope is a simple question. Do we need to have more or fewer people coming to our southern border?
Senator, we are working on diminishing the number of people whom we encounter at our southern border because of the challenge it presents. We're trying to build lawful, safe, and orderly pathways to accomplish that.
Okay, fewer. So we need to have fewer, which means we need to roll back incentives to come. So I would have thought that would have been the answer. Let's talk about what you're doing, though. In January of this year, you rolled out a new phone app called CBP One, an app for a cell phone. I've got a picture of it behind me here. This phone app allows, and I'm going to quote from your own fact sheet, it allows, and I quote, non-citizens without appropriate documents for admission to schedule an appointment to come to the border. They can now go on their phone and schedule a time to come to the border and then be admitted. And you identified 7 separate border points of entry where they could come. 5 of them in Texas, 2 of them in California, 1 in Arizona. It's like a concierge service for illegal immigrants. My question is, you didn't think the border crisis was bad enough that now we're going to have an app that allows illegals to schedule their appointments and come and be admitted to this country?
Senator, you're mischaracterizing the use of the application. Let me explain it to you. We are currently enforcing the public health order of Title 42, and I know you're very familiar with it. There is a process for individuals who claim an exception to the Title 42 expulsion authority because of an acute medical condition.
Well, let's talk about this app.
If I may finish, an urgent humanitarian reason. So instead of them coming in between the ports of entry to claim that urgent medical condition, that extraordinarily acute humanitarian cause, we allow a limited number to arrive at our ports of entry and seek the emergency relief that they need.
Schedule, you allow them, let's be particular about what you do.
And I should say that the CBP One app was not unveiled for the first time on January 5th of this year.
Oh, no, but you changed it. You made it available on January 5th to the illegals themselves. You don't have to be a lawyer to use it. You don't have to be a member of a non-governmental organization. Anybody can download the app and use it on their phone. And for the first time, you allowed them to schedule appointments. Now, let's talk about what actually happens when they come to the border. It's interesting. You characterized this when you rolled it out as an application for applying for asylum. But nowhere on the app do you actually require the illegal migrants to apply for asylum or to claim asylum or anything about asylum. And in fact, when they then get to the border, you don't ask them questions, you don't do interviews, you just release them. Here's the Texas Monthly, not a notable conservative outlet, who reports, and I quote, "At no point does the app ask users, are you seeking asylum? Those arriving for the CBP One appointments are given no interviews, asked no questions about vulnerabilities that they may or may not have listed in the app or about why they're coming to the United States. They're simply released into the country, end quote. So rather than building a wall, Mr. Secretary, you have built Ticketmaster for illegal immigrants.
You are, Senator, you are conflating programs. Let me explain
Well,
to
just
you.
respond to this. Is it true that they are given no interviews, asked no questions, and simply released into the country?
Let me explain to you what we announced on January 5th.
No, I want you to explain to me what's happening. I know what you announced. I read it to you.
So I will explain to you what is happening.
Are they given interviews? Let's start with
because
that. Are they given interviews?
We were previously experiencing
That's starting to sound like a no. Well, let's just
90
hone in here. Mr.
almost-
Secretary, my time is very limited. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to drive to some clarity here.
But Senator,
The Texas Monthly has reported that once illegal immigrants go on their phone and reserve their time to come to the border, once they use your concierge service that you've created for them, when they come, they are given no interviews. They are asked no questions about any vulnerabilities. They are simply released into the country. Is that happening?
Senator, you are mistaken. And if I may explain,
Are they given interviews?
if I may explain, individuals who seek parole under our January 5th program for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans are screened and vetted before they arrive at our border.
Wait a minute. No, they go on they go on the phone and they just reserve a time, and then they show up and they're given nothing. Listen to this. Even immigration advocates are amazed about this. Here, also from the Texas Monthly. Here's one immigration advocate whose first name is Orta. She says, that's the crazy part. Nothing in this new program requires you to actually seek asylum. Somehow, we've decided to punish those who arrive at the border without the app, who may be seeking asylum, but we just let in anybody who may or may not have any particular reason to seek asylum, so long as they've made an appointment on your Ticketmaster app. This seems crazy to me.
Senator, it's a complete mischaracterization of the program that we announced and are implementing
So how many people have used the app then?
that you are referring to. So if I can explain.
How many people have used the app?
So we had a significant surge of Cubans.
How many people have used the app?
Nicaraguans and Venezuelans.
Mr. Secretary, you're here to answer my questions. How many people have used the app?
Tens of thousands have sought to make an appointment at the port of entry under our parole program.
Okay, good. How many have been admitted without an interview at the border?
You are, again, inserting a fact that does not belong in your question. So if I can, I will get you the precise.
I'm reading to you from public reports about how your own app works. You're just blanket actually, you're not quite denying it. You're saying that maybe we don't understand. Apparently, I don't understand. Texas Monthly doesn't understand. Immigration advocates don't understand. You're the only one who understands, yet you won't answer my question. How much did this cost to develop, by the way?
Senator, I don't have the cost, but let me share with you a critical
Well, will you
fact.
get it for us?
Let me share with you a critical
Will you
fact.
get us the cost of to develop this app?
Happily.
Did you contract with a tech firm to develop it?
Senator, we have seen approximately.
Did you contract with a tech firm to develop it?
We have seen an approximately
for heaven's sake.
95% decrease.
Did you contract with a tech firm to develop it? Yes or no?
Senator, this was led by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, our technical experts within the agency, and I certainly will get an answer to your question whether outside consultants were utilized
So you don't
in the
know.
development process.
You don't know.
May I explain to you, since you have a misunderstanding of the program, what it is and the impact, the positive impact it has had on encounters of these four populations in between the
I just
ports of
want to know
entry.
why it is that you are allowing people to come to this border, to make appointments, to not be interviewed, and then how many have just been released? Is it true, by the way, as the Texas Monthly reports, that they're simply released into the country on official parole? And get this, they're not given, according to their reporting, any kind of follow-up. Their court dates are in immigration courts, Texas Monthly reports, not even necessarily asylum trials. They're often general deportation hearings where defendants can make arguments for remaining in the country. Is that true?
That is a completely mistaken understanding of how the immigration process works. That language is completely confusing and erroneous.
Well, it is confusing. What's confusing is why anybody would think that an app like this to allow illegal immigrants to literally reserve a time to come to the border and then be ushered in without an interview, without follow-up, without tracking is stunning. It's absolutely stunning. Let me ask you in my very short time remaining something else about Chinese nationals. I've only got a minute left.
That is false.
Let me ask you about the Chinese nationals who we all saw coming over the border, busloads of them, and then being released in the American interior. What's the percentage increase of Chinese nationals who crossed the border this year, Mr. Secretary? Let's just focus on maybe the Rio Grande Valley sector.
The number of Chinese nationals encountered at our southern border has increased significally.
Do you know how much?
Over the past, I don't have the precise
I
percentage.
do. It's 900% just in the Rio Grande Valley sector. Are any of these people who came in this bus, these Chinese nationals, members of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, if an individual presents a national security or public safety threat, we detain them during the pendency
But that's not what I asked. I asked if they're members of the CCP.
during the pendency of their removal proceedings.
Are any of these individuals members of the CCP?
So
I think there's about
indeed-
70 who came on this bus.
If indeed they are determined to be a national security threat or a threat to public safety, we detain them pending their removal proceedings.
Were any of these individuals detained, or were they released into the interior of the country?
I don't have awareness of that particular group of individuals.
And so you don't know if any of them were members of the CCP? Or actually, you do know, you just won't say.
I don't know from the photograph, Senator, to whom
But
you're
surely you
precisely
know about the folks who, you've read this report, you're the Secretary of Homeland Security, you're aware of these individuals. Were any of them members of the Chinese Communist Party coming into this country?
Senator, you're providing me with a group of individuals without names, identities, or
So you're not familiar with this incident that was widely reported on at the southern border? Don't you think it's strange that we have busloads of Chinese nationals coming across our southern border? I'm asking you from a hostile country, I'm asking you if they're members of the Chinese Communist Party, and you don't know, apparently, you won't say.
We are very focused on all things with respect to the People's Republic of
But you
China.
don't know any of the details. I plead exhaustion, Mr. Secretary. You have exhausted me, you have exhausted this panel, you have exhausted the patience of the American people. You should resign.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Secretary, do you agree with the President that we should ban the private ownership of assault weapons in America?
Senator, I do.
What is an assault weapon?
It is, for example, an AK-47.
Can you give me a definition other than just pointing to a specific weapon? Would there be other weapons besides an AK-47 you would ban?
There very well are. And I remember when I was a federal prosecutor in the Central District of California from September 25th, 1989 to, I believe it was April 2001.
And I thank you for your
all of
service,
the-
but if you
all
could
of the
answer
law
my
enforcement, the vast majority of law enforcement officers, leaders with whom I worked were greatly in support of the assault weapons
Mr.
ban.
Chairman, you know
because of-
why we get so frustrated with you? Because you won't give straight answers.
I think I just did.
No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Do you have a definition of an assault weapon?
I am confident there is a technical definition of what is an assault weapon, and it was assuredly used in the context of the statute that previously existed banning assault weapons.
Mr. Secretary, our southern border is not secure, is it?
Senator, I have spoken about this. I believe I've addressed this earlier in the hearing.
Why don't you address it again?
Of course. Let me share with you a few things. Number one, when I speak of the security of the border, I am speaking of maximizing the resources we have to deliver the most effective results.
So
and let me assure you that we are
it's
doing
secure
so.
because we're trying to secure it. Are we succeeding?
Senator, we are so focused on the security of our southern border. We are doing so much with
But you're
respect
not
to
succeeding.
the surge of personnel.
How you're not succeeding?
Oh, Senator, let me share with you that the challenge of migration that we are experiencing at our southern border is not exclusive to the United States. It is something that is gripping the entire
But
hemisphere.
my job is to worry about the United States.
as
Mr.
is
Chairman.
mine, as is mine.
And here's my question. Let me try to rephrase it. And I really do wish, I understand the position you're in, but you really should try to do a better job of answering the questions. Under the Biden administration, we have the most encounters. We have had the most encounters with people attempting to come into our country illegally in the history of ever. Under the Biden administration, we have had the most people entering our country illegally in the history of ever. Under the Biden administration, we have had the most gotaways at our southern border in the history of ever. Under the Biden administration, we have had the most number of people entering our country under a claim of asylum, having that claim turned down and still not being deported in the history of ever. And under the Biden administration, we've had the most fentanyl coming into our country in the history of ever. How can you possibly say the southern border is secure?
Do you know
I
that-
understand your answer that you're trying, but I'm not asking about your efforts. I'm asking about the results.
Well, let's talk about the results then, Senator. Do you know that last year we expelled and removed approximately 1.4 million people from the southern border? I believe that's the most ever. Do you realize that we are focused on enforcing our laws to achieve the security of the southern border?
I know
That
you're
people-
focused, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Secretary, but you're not succeeding.
Senator,
And when you come testify to us, you talk about how you're trying really hard. And I don't have any way to disprove that. I accept that statement in good faith. But the numbers belie that.
If I can, Senator, let me give you an example of a solution that we have delivered that for some reason is being contested. Because it's
Mr.
caused the
Secretary,
95.
I give you 30 seconds, okay?
It's caused the 95.
Don't filibuster me.
It's
You've
caused-
been doing that all day. I'm just trying to ask
I'm just
you
trying to
questions.
communicate. It has led to approximately 95% drop in the number of encounters in between the ports of entry at our southern border of Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans.
Mr. Secretary,
on January 5th.
Mr.
And why would that
Secretary.
be opposed when it is delivering precisely the result that you seek?
Did you just parachute in from another planet, Mr. Secretary? Because you're the only person in the Milky Way who believes that we're not having massive illegal immigration into America.
Senator, you're putting words into my mouth.
No, sir,
There is-
I'm
there is-
accurately describing the
There is
situation.
no question. There is no question that we have a very serious challenge at our southern border.
Okay,
It
let
is
me-
a
let me-
challenge.
Well,
that is
we can agree on that. Let me ask you another question. Why don't you just declare a new policy that other than children, if you present at the southern border, you claim refugee status, you claim political asylum, and you haven't claimed refugee status and political asylum at the first safe country, then you can't come in.
Senator, so first of all, when one presents at the border, it's an asylum claim, not a
But why
refugee.
don't you do that? Why don't
Not
you
a
just
refugee claim.
unilaterally declare that a safe third country policy? It would work. You can't come into America. If you're coming from Venezuela and you come through Mexico, if you didn't claim asylum in Mexico, you can't come here. You have to leave. Why don't you just do that?
Well, Senator, let me give you an example with respect to Mexico. A safe third country agreement, let's hypothetically
you
assume.
don't have to have an agreement with Mexico.
Yes, you do.
No, you don't.
I believe you do,
No,
Senator.
you don't.
I'll have
Other
to-
countries don't do it. Just adopt a policy that says, except for children, because you don't want to send children back by themselves. Just adopt a new policy that if you didn't seek asylum in the first safe third country, you can't come in, period.
Senator, are you aware of the notice of proposed rulemaking that we issued, the comment period of which closed yesterday?
You've had 2 years to adopt a policy like I just described. Why haven't you done it?
So, Senator, what we have done
But why haven't you done that?
We have surged enforcement resources. We have
Why haven't
developed.
you just adopted, please, if you would, Mr. Secretary, answer my question.
It is my understanding.
Why haven't you adopted unilaterally a safe third country policy? That would stop, except for children, all the folks from the Northern Triangle countries, all the folks from Venezuela, all the folks from Cuba, all the folks from the Middle East from coming into our country. Why haven't you done that?
Senator, it's my understanding that those are two things. It is my understanding that those agreements do require
You don't have to have an agreement with anybody. It can be a policy established by the Department of Homeland Security.
Senator, I'd have to review the.
You haven't reviewed that? You haven't considered that possibility?
Let me finish, if I may.
Sure.
I would have to review the legal underpinnings of your assertion.
Well, you better get reviewing.
And I also
You ought to
do
get
not-
reviewing. This is the first time that's occurred to you.
I also do not think that that is sound policy.
You don't think
shut-
this is the first time that's occurred to you?
I also do not think that that is sound policy, that we should shut down our entire asylum system.
I didn't say shut down the entire asylum system. I said safe third country. All you have to do, Mr. Secretary, if you're really serious, and it's beginning, frankly, to appear that you're not, is adopt a policy that says we're not seeking anyone's agreement. We don't have to. If you're coming from another country and you come through, let's say, Mexico, and you say you're seeking asylum, you have to seek it in Mexico or the other first safe third country, or you can't come in. Period. Done. End of story. Why don't you do that?
Senator, I don't think that we have the unilateral authority.
Sure you do. Other countries
Number one
do
and
it.
number two, as
If
I've
you
mentioned.
try sneaking into China,
As I've mentioned, I do not think that is sound policy.
why?
Because you are basically shutting down our asylum system.
No,
and
you're
doing-
not. You're saying we honor your right to seek political asylum, but you're cherry picking. Do it in Mexico first. Why haven't you done that?
I think I've addressed that issue, Senator.
You don't want to do it, Mr. Secretary. That's what it's beginning to look like, because you think our borders ought to be open. And it would be more intellectually honest if you just say that.
That is false.
I don't agree with you. You have to watch up here what people do, not what they say, and everything else is just cottage cheese.
Senator, I don't think
Thank you,
I don't
Mr.
think the 1.4 million people who were expelled or removed last year would consider the border open.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, you've had millions coming into the country illegally. The most of the history of ever under your watch. And everybody knows that, apparently, except you. Either that or you're not being forthcoming with
We've also had the largest number of individuals expelled or removed from the southern border. And if one takes a look at the apprehension and encounter numbers and then the removal numbers, one would have a different view.
If you do the safe third country policy, that'll solve half of your problem right there.
Thank
And
you,
you're not
Senator.
denying anybody asylum.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questions today, I do want to express my heartbreak at what happened yesterday in Nashville at Covenant School and Covenant Presbyterian Church. And my family and I are grieving along with the rest of the community. And I thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your call yesterday, your kind remarks today. And violence against children is just one of the most heinous crimes. And the families there at Covenant Pres and Covenant School, I just grieve for what they're going through. We have to work to protect children at school, and that means increasing security. And I have had legislation that would allow for training and hiring of veterans and former law enforcement officials to serve as school safety officers and to help protect our schools. It is time for us to pass that and to help keep our children safe. I'd like to turn to the questions that are in front of us today. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your patience today. I want to go to this issue of human smuggling. And under this administration, the human smuggling business has gone from being a $500 million a year business to a $13 billion a year industry. And we heard from Secretary Becerra last week at our Senate Finance Committee. And we've got 85,000 unaccompanied alien children, migrant children, who have been released in the U.S. The HHS has lost track of these unaccompanied children. So my question to you is this: how many of these children are being trafficked? How many of these children are being put into the sex trade? What are you doing to try to find these children? And when you look at what is happening to women and children, do you all understand that it is the policies of this administration, what you're doing on the border, that is causing 85,000 children to be lost, can't find them, and not knowing if they're being trafficked, put in gangs, put in the sex trade? So what are you all doing to find these children? And do you understand that it is the policies that is causing this?
Senator, let me share with you what we are doing to address the scourge of human smuggling and human trafficking. And let me say, with respect to the unaccompanied children, and this will echo what I shared with Senator Ossoff just a moment ago. With respect to unaccompanied children, when we receive them at the border, it is our legal obligation to release them to the care of the Department of Health and Human Services within
That's right, and now they cannot find them.
within 72 hours.
85,000.
And so what we do is we release
Is that
them.
an acceptable number?
Oh, absolutely not.
Right.
Absolutely not.
So
But-
what-
So let me share with you. So we release them. One of the reasons why we are devoting our worksite enforcement resources and energies on unscrupulous employers is precisely for the reason that you identify. We must hold accountable employers who engage in
Okay,
child
I
labor.
appreciate that. Let's look
With
at
respect,
it.
with
Yeah.
respect to the border,
Yeah, and
we-
let's look at it this way.
two efforts we have underway. One is we are taking it to the smugglers in an unprecedented
They haven't
effort.
gotten that message.
Oh, yes, they have. We have.
I beg to differ, because the situation, it is now a $13 billion a year business. When you go to that border, as I have done, and when you talk to women that have been trafficked and have gotten themselves out and have been raped repeatedly, there is a sexual assault epidemic going on that border. And it is because of the policies of this administration.
Senator.
And it is so,
Senator, it is because of the heinous exploitation of the smuggling organizations.
And what is
that do not
incentivizing
care,
that?
That do not
that's right.
care.
That's exactly right. And you and I agree on that. They do not care about human life. They see people as a product.
Yes, they are.
And a way to make a buck, because they are billion-dollar businesses. They have, and let me turn to the fentanyl epidemic, because we've all talked about this. And I'm hearing from some of my sheriffs now that from a border town sheriff, that fentanyl, a pill now is down to about 5 cents, because they've teamed up with the Chinese scientists. They're making these in the labs with the cartels. And I think that you've talked a little bit about the fentanyl today. but you really don't have an estimate of how much is truly coming over that border. And we know that you're saying that they are catching about 95% of that. But what I have heard is what you're giving us is the CBP numbers. You're not giving us the numbers that are coming from air and marine operations. You're not including the Coast Guard. You're not including the DEA, and you're not including what is found by state and local law enforcement. So why won't you look at the holistic number of what everybody is finding?
Oh, Senator, the scourge of fentanyl is something that we do not in any way underestimate. Let me, if I may, share with you. As I mentioned earlier, I served as a federal prosecutor for 12 years.
Yes.
I prosecuted
No,
cocaine.
you're not answering my
Oh, no, if
question,
I
and I've
can.
only got 3 minutes left.
If I can.
Why are you not, why do you not include what everybody is finding? State and local law
do.
enforcement, the
But the-
DEA, the Marine?
We do. Senator, the question that was posed to me was with respect to the southern border and how fentanyl is trafficked into the United States.
Okay, I
And
need
the
to
vast
move
majority
on,
of
but
it-
if you
vast
will,
majority of it is brought in through the ports of entry.
no, sir, I beg to differ with that. When you talk to Border Patrol and you talk to local sheriffs, I would like to get from you in writing a total number of what you are finding, not only from CBP, but also from the air and marine operations, the Coast Guard, the DEA, and state and local law enforcement. Let me move on about the gotaways, because we've had over 1.2 million migrants that have evaded authorities and have come into the country illegally. And it is of concern to me when I hear you all try to make illegal legal. There's an app for this, and allowing people to continue to come in illegally. Now, ICE arrested 220 illegal immigrants in 9 days that had criminal convictions of rape and murder. Now, it doesn't take rocket science to go figure out that in those 1.2 million that are unknown gotaways or known gotaways, that number that have disappeared in our country, that you've got murderers and criminals and rapists that are in that number, the gotaways. So how many of those have made it into Tennessee? How many are in our communities? How many are in our streets? Are you all tracking these, or have you lost them like the 85,000 children?
Senator, I would say two things. Number one, we are intensely focused on securing the border, as I have testified earlier. Number
Okay,
one.
then-
And number two, I think it's very important not to paint with a broad brush individuals who come to the United States.
Well, I
And
think it's
so-
important to note what Border Patrol is telling us. If you're intent on securing the border, then you spend $50 million a year to caretake the items, components from the border wall project that was in the previous administration. The border wall, by the way, the Border Patrol has been asking for a physical barrier for decades. I think about 30 years in total. So instead of wasting that money to do nothing with the construction material, why don't you use those remaining materials and that $50 million and fill in the gaps in this wall so that the Border Patrol has a physical barrier that they need?
Senator, I've approved the vast majority of the projects to close the gaps and complete the gates with respect to the funding that we received.
Mr. Chairman, I have one other question on Chinese nationals that I will submit for a written answer. Thank you.